Plenty to get to. We're going to start off our conversations here with some playoff previews, if you will. A look at the playoff picture for the Dallas Cowboys and the NFC specifically, as if things were to get started today in the postseason, you would be looking at the number 5 seed for the Dallas Cowboys. And what does that mean? Well, that means you're hitting the road. Where are you going? You're going to Atlanta, and you're playing the Atlanta Falcons. So 877-881-1053, let us know, are you okay with where things stand right now as the Eagles keep on piling on wins? They get their 10th win of the season yesterday. Mm-hmm. You're kind of staring down the barrel of having to win out if you're the Cowboys, if you're trying to look at the NFC East picture, because the Eagles are just finding ways to win one-score games. I have plenty of thoughts about that, but my prevailing thought here is I'm just trying to hold on for dear life for the 5 seed because
wow. So you are, in fact, resigned to the Cowboys in the 5 seed.
I am absolutely resigned to the Cowboys in the 5 seed, and there's a few different reasons. There's only one factor of this that actually really scares me, and that's the fact that they would be on the road because they've been so good at home for the most part this season. It's been utter blowouts. I love seeing the Cowboys play AT&T Stadium, and I would love that in the first round of the playoffs. But if you're going to go against a team in the playoffs where it matters the most, I would not mind it being the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, the reason why obviously this question comes up is you see Monday Night Football, and maybe one of the better chances at the Philadelphia Eagles, who currently lead the NFC East. I know that's not fun to hear, but I mean, it is the case. And there was a chance, there was a challenge. You had Josh Allen throwing the football incredibly well. It played an incredibly good game outside of a single turnover that was just a really bad decision. Yeah. And this was yet another one of those instances where the Eagles kind of got away with it, right? They have just been a team that have found ways to win, even when they've looked gettable. And so I know that there's a lot of Cowboys fans out there, and particularly on Twitter, which I understand it's not necessarily the entirety of the world, but I think it can be somewhat illustrative of what's happening. And I saw folks out there that are like, oh man, trying to find where you can get that loss back with the Eagles, and then maybe you can, even this up once the Cowboys then take on Philadelphia here in a week or two. And so with that being the case, like after you see the Bills give it their best shot and not be able to get anything done, and you look up and this Eagles team is now 10-1, and they're kind of cruising through what is supposed to be a tough portion of their schedule before they hit the likes of let me see what we've got going. They've still got the Niners coming up, but then they got the Seahawks, and then they get the Giants, Cardinals, Giants, right? Like they end the season with a really easy schedule. And so it made me wonder, like, are you just in a place where you're like, look, let's be honest, that number one, or not even number one, but getting a first round bye might be out of the realm of possibilities. Getting that NFC East win might be out of the realm of possibility. And I'm still holding out hope because we've seen this year in particular. And I felt like early on in the season, I looked up and I was like, wait, is this going to be one of those years where like nobody's particularly like good?
Yeah. And
not quite, right? You have some teams that are good. However, everybody has their losses, right? I know that when we talk about the Cowboys, because it's close, we've talked about these losses that are, obviously you had the ways in which the Niners embarrassed you in front of company. You had the ways in which you just gave up a bad one to Arizona. You played with Philadelphia pretty well, but ultimately came up on the bad side of it. And then you look at the wins that you have, and they're all against teams that are under 500. And with that being the case, people are looking around and like, that doesn't mean anything, right? That's a bad loss. And we talk about those things, but you look around and all these teams that we look at as good have a bad loss or two on their resume. And you're like, all right, so are the Eagles going to get that? And they're just not necessarily. However, they could succumb to the same thing that you've seen the Cowboys succumb to with Arizona. You've seen the Niners succumb to. You've seen good teams have kind of head-scratching losses. And so I'm still holding out hope that maybe that happens. But some of that still feels like naivete when I see the way that the Eagles are getting this done, because that's a pretty well-made roster. That's a really well-made roster. And ultimately, even when they don't play up to their best potential, they are still good enough to be able to get those, get out of the jams that they've put themselves in.
Yeah, the one-score games have been absolutely just pivotal for the Eagles. And the point differential is a whole conversation that's been had about them. And, it just feels like the perfect regular season roster to me. You mentioned the roster construction over there in Philadelphia. Howie Roseman's work is just phenomenal. It's a very complete roster. There's not many places that you point towards and say, hey, that's a place that they can get got. There's guys that can give up plays, but there's not guys that are going to lose you games necessarily. And I'm really torn because I've kind of gone back and forth with it, especially after watching the Eagles this weekend. And, against the Chiefs, you're seeing it against premier competition that, they're finding ways to win when it matters. So I'm thinking for the regular season, for the most part, I'm just looking at what's next outside of a 1 seed, outside of a first round bye, outside of the division. It's hard not to for me. I always hold out hope to some extent. I always do, not just for the Dallas Cowboys, but for any team in the NFL, because we see weird implosions happen a lot. I mean, we were talking before Crosstalk with G-Bag earlier to Broadus.
Yes.
He was like, looking at this AFC South, there's teams that were supposed to be awful this year, and they're all really competitive. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts lost their rookie quarterback, Anthony Richardson, for the season. He only played a few games, and they're still out here winning football games with Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
So I hold out hope, and I reserve that right to backtrack a little bit to some extent, but I'll eat my crow if I'm wrong. I just think that you need to start putting together the quality wins and not really worrying about what lies ahead of you in terms of playoff seeding. If you can just start getting me the wins, I don't think I care about the seeding as much as I do the level of play, if that makes sense. Because if you start not caring about the seeding, you're probably going to start moving up in the seeding and having to play a better team.
You subscribe to the theory, don't think about it, it'll come to you? Is that where you're at?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think that this is where the two conversations converge, because one of the things that gives me a little bit of hope, I'm able to hold out a little bit of hope, is that you're seeing the style of play change, right? Early on in the season when this team was winning and obviously beating teams that a lot of people looked at and said, were willing to scoff at or, kind of wave away, it was in part because you were doing it in such a fashion where the defense was dominant, right? We understood that to be the case, but the offense was not doing things that made you feel confident in it. Over the stretch of games since the bye week, you've seen a style of offense, a flavor of offense that makes you go, hey, man, this looks like a team that can be dominant. This looks like a team that, if the defense maybe is not being otherworldly, not being nickname worthy, not being historical at times, which we haven't necessarily seen, but if they're in that place, the offense looks like they're capable of saying, okay, we need to turn it to another gear. We need to get the ball down the field. We need to get chunk plays, things of that nature, which we did not see early on in the season. And that makes me look up and go, okay, maybe now you have the capability and the possibilities of one, beating Philadelphia, which that would be the start if you wanted to get some better seeding. But then two, actually being the threat that this Cowboys team needs to be in the postseason. And I think that's where all this conversation is, right? Having the right seeding is not just to be able to hold that up and say, yeah, we won the NFC East, which is great, right? And not just being able to say we are in this position. It's to give you a better opportunity to achieve the ultimate goal for these Cowboys, which is going deep in the playoffs. And part of that has just been play style as well, being the type of team that you can depend on night in, night out, right, week in, week out, to come and play a type of game where you're capable of competing in a real way against good teams.
At that point, I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the rest of the playoff seeding, and I'm starting to think, if you were to move up, where would you want to go? Because if you move up, obviously, one spot you just flip spots with Atlanta, but if you move up into
I don't know that you can end up in that spot with Atlanta, right? If you win the division, That's true. You're going to have a record that puts you up in that place where you probably have, well, I mean, obviously the 1 seed gets a bye, but you probably are in a place where you're going to get a very advantageous, favorable matchup. And of course, the biggest portion of that is you're playing at home. And as you detailed earlier, this team has been gangbusters at AT&T Stadium.
Man, because I'm starting to look around the rest of the playoff seeding. I'm like, obviously, Minnesota, they're playing Monday Night Football right now. They're down 3-0 to the Bears, which this is a barn burner of a game. Not. But other teams in the NFC are starting to show their weaknesses as well, like the Detroit Lions. We saw it on Thanksgiving Day. Things kind of implode there with them against the Green Bay Packers. You talked about earlier in the segment that, kind of thought at the beginning of the year this might be one of those years where teams are just kind of good, not great. And we're starting to see some of that in the bottom echelon. The 1 and the 2, we know who they are in the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco 49ers. We know the 49ers are a juggernaut, and the Eagles are just a team that is gritty and going to win no matter what the circumstance is. outside of that, I really don't know, and that's where I'm ready for the Cowboys to take that next step and to start as early as this Thursday going against the winning teams, which then there's going to be the person that says, hey, if you beat the Seattle Seahawks, they're not a winning team anymore. They're at 500. I get it. But if you can start with Seattle, then you can really start to have some advantages going into this and try to get that advantageous matchup in the first round of the playoffs. So I think I am resigning to the Cowboys in the 5th seed, but I'm open for conversation.
Which is funny because it feels like if you're what, 11 weeks or 12 weeks into a season and you look up and you go, damn, this is all that we can get. You would think that would mean that you are pretty down on a team. And I don't know that that's where anybody, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone because that's sincerely not fair, particularly speaking to Cowboys Nation, which is not a monolith by any means. You get far different stretches of, people's feelings on this team. But I think that a lot of people that look at this team would not have the feeling of, damn, this team has a cap. This team can't be a certain, thing. I think you look at it and go, even if you are resigned to the 5th seed is probably where you are, I think there's still reasons to look up and be like, but I still think the Cowboys can get the job done. The job being making a deep run. They're still going to have to show you something. And that begins, as you mentioned, with Thursday night against the Seattle Seahawks, actually going and beating a team that has some level of expectation coming into the game. But I think that I'm still in a place where I can see someone resigning to the 5th seed and still looking up and being like, this Cowboys team is one of the better ones of the last couple of years and has an opportunity to really show you something in the postseason because that's what it's about for them.